My name is Daniel Hargrove. I'm 41 years old. And the day my family erased me, they did it with cake on the table and smiles on their faces, like it was something worth celebrating. I found out on a Tuesday in November, the kind of cold that doesn't commit, just hovers around 40 degrees and makes everything feel unfinished. I had driven 4 hours from Cincinnati to my childhood home in Clarksville, Tennessee, because my mother had called me the Sunday before and said, "Daniel, we're having a small gathering. Your father wants everyone together. Bring yourself. Just you. Don't make it complicated." I remember thinking that was a strange thing to say. Don't make it complicated. I wasn't complicated. I was the one who called every Sunday. I was the one who had driven down twice in 2022 when my father's knee surgery had him bedridden. I was the one who had fixed the gutter on the south side of their house in the August heat because my brother Preston said he was too busy and my sister Vanessa said she didn't do ladders. So I drove down. I left Cincinnati at 6 in the morning. I stopped once for gas in Bowling Green. I pulled onto Cartwright Lane at 10:17 in the morning, and the first thing I noticed was that there were 6 cars in the driveway, and on the curb that I did not recognise. Not 6 family cars. 6 cars that belonged to people I'd never seen at my parents' house in my entire life. The second thing I noticed was the sign. It was mounted on a wooden stake in the front yard between the 2 dogwood trees my father had planted the year I was born. White banner, red and blue letters, printed professionally. It read, Hargrove and Sons Realty, serving Clarksville since 2023. Beneath the name, 2 headshots, Preston Hargrove, and a man I'd never seen before named Cole Vickers, Hargrove and Sons. I sat in my truck for a full minute and looked at that sign. I was a Hargrove. I had one brother. Preston was a Hargrove. The sign said, Sons, plural. It said since 2023. It was now November 2024. This company had existed for over a year. This company bore my family name. And I'd never heard its name spoken once. I got out of the truck. Inside the house there were people in pressed clothes standing around my mother's dining room table with name tags and glasses of sweet tea. My mother was at the far end of the room in her good blouse, the burgundy one she saved for church and funerals. She saw me and her face did something complicated that I had never seen it do before. It wasn't surprise. It was closer to the look a person makes when they've rehearsed what to say and suddenly forgotten every word. Preston crossed the room first. He was 44, 3 years older than me, and he'd been the kind of older brother who could make you feel grateful for being included in the same sentence as him. He'd done it my whole life. He did it that morning too, with a handshake and a shoulder grip. The kind of casual power move that says, I'm happy to see you, but I'm also the host here. Daniel. Glad you made it, man. We've got some exciting news. He said it the way you say exciting news when the news is for you and the other person is just there to absorb it. My father was in his leather chair by the window, the one he'd had since 1998. Gerald Hargrove was 71, retired civil engineer, a man who had communicated primarily through silence and expectation his entire life. He looked at me when I walked in and he nodded once. Not the warm nod, the closing a chapter nod. I stood in the middle of my childhood home surrounded by strangers in name tags, and I said, "What is all this?" Preston said, "That's actually what we wanted to talk to you about. Come sit down." He said, "Come sit down in my parents' house." His voice had the quiet authority of a man who already owned the room and was doing me a courtesy by letting me be in it. I sat. Everyone else kept talking around me. The strangers with the name tags were, I would learn over the next 20 minutes, real estate investors from Nashville, silent partners in Hargrove and Sons, people who had been brought into my family name as a business vehicle, without my knowledge and without my consent, and apparently without anyone finding that strange enough to mention. Then my father cleared his throat. He was still in his chair. He did not stand. My father had always done serious things from his chair. He told me when our dog died from his chair. He told me I wasn't getting the summer job I wanted from his chair. He told me from his chair, "Son," he said, "we made some decisions about the estate last spring, about how things get structured going forward. Your mother and I talked about it for a long time, and we decided it was cleaner this way." I said, "What way?" Preston said, "The property is going into the business. The business carries the family legacy forward. Dad wanted it tied to something active, something that grows. You've built your life in Cincinnati. You've got your own thing up there." I looked at my father. My own thing up there was a 14-year career as a structural engineer with a firm in Cincinnati. I owned a house. I had a savings account and a retirement fund, and I paid my taxes on time. I had, in the specific language of the Hargrove family narrative, done fine. Not Preston-level fine. Not the kind of fine that got your name on a sign in the front yard. But fine. My father said, "The house goes to the business trust on my passing. The trust is structured, so Preston manages the assets. You'll receive a fixed sum." "It's fair, Daniel. It's already been drawn up," I said. "When was this drawn up?" "March," my mother said quietly from across the room. She was holding a glass of sweet tea with both hands. I said, "I'm sorry." "March of what year?" Preston said, "March of this year." "Look, we can go over the numbers. It's all clean. You're not being cut out. You're just not the right fit for managing real estate assets. And everyone knows that. You're an engineer. You're great at what you do. This just makes sense structurally." Structurally. He used the word structurally to explain to a structural engineer why his family had restructured itself without him. I want to tell you I said something devastating in that moment. I want to tell you I stood up and laid it all out, right there in front of the Nashville investors, and made everyone feel the weight of what they had done. I didn't. I sat very still for a long moment. Then I said, "Okay, send me the documents when they are ready." And I stood up, shook my father's hand, hugged my mother, and drove back to Cincinnati. I did not cry on the drive home. I listened to a sports radio station until Bowling Green, and then I turned it off and drove the rest of the way in silence. I was not sad yet. I was doing what I had always done when something hit me too hard to process immediately. I was filing it, putting it somewhere I could come back to when I had enough information to understand what exactly had happened. What I did when I got home was not dramatic. I made coffee. I sat at my kitchen table, and I called my uncle. Roy Hargrove was my father's younger brother, 66 years old, retired from the army, living on a lake outside of Murfreesboro. He had been at every Thanksgiving of my life. He had taught me to fish when I was 7. He had given me a pocket knife on my 12th birthday with my initials on the blade that I still kept in my desk drawer. He was also, I knew, the executor of my paternal grandfather's estate, which had never been fully settled because my grandfather Earl Hargrove had died in 2019 with a contested will, and the family had agreed to let it sit in informal probate while things got sorted. Roy answered on the second ring. I told him in plain sentences what had happened. Roy listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Daniel, there are some things I should have told you before now. I'm sorry I didn't. I need you to come see me, not on the phone. Come down to the lake." I drove to Murfreesboro the following Saturday. Roy's house sat back from the water with a covered porch that faced west. We sat outside with coffee, even though it was cold, because Roy said the walls in that house listened, and he wanted the sky above him for what he was about to say. He started with my grandfather. Earl Hargrove had owned 340 acres of land in Robertson County, Tennessee. He had also owned 3 commercial properties in Clarksville, a storage facility, a strip of warehouse space, and a small retail building on Riverside Drive that had been leased to a hardware business since 1991. When Earl died in November 2019, he had a will. The will left the bulk of the estate in equal thirds to his 3 children: Gerald, my father; Roy, my uncle; and my Aunt Patricia, who had passed away in 2017. Patricia's share was, per the will, to pass to her children. She had 2, a son named Marcus and a daughter named Diane. Roy said, "Your father contested it." I said, "He contested his own father's will." He wanted Patricia's share absorbed back into the primary estate and split 2 ways between him and me. He said Marcus and Diane were estranged and wouldn't have known what to do with it anyway. He hired an attorney named Clifford Brand out of Nashville. They filed a challenge on a technicality about the notarization of a codicil that Earl had added in 2018. I said, "What happened?" Roy said, "It's been sitting in informal review for 5 years. The attorneys have been billing both sides. Nothing has been finalised. But here's what your father did not know. Earl came to see me 6 months before he died. He was worried about exactly this. He knew your father. He updated the trust document. Not the will. The trust. And he put a sealed clause in it that only the trustee, which is me, and the named secondary beneficiary would know about." I said, "Who is the secondary beneficiary?" Roy looked at me. He said, "You are." The silence that followed was the kind that rearranges things inside you. I said, I'm in my grandfather's trust. Roy said, Earl loved Preston fine, but he told me something once that I've carried for 5 years. He said Preston had his father's ambition and his grandmother's appetite, and that combination in a man with money always ends the same way. He said Daniel has his mother's patience and my grandfather's stubbornness, and that combination in a man without money is how you build something that lasts. Roy reached into the house through the porch door and came back with a manila envelope, brown sealed with my name on it in my grandfather's handwriting. Earl Hargrove's handwriting. A man who had been dead for 5 years. He said, he gave me this before he went into the hospital the last time. He said to give it to you when you needed it. I've been waiting 5 years to know when that was. I opened the envelope. Inside was a 4-page trust amendment dated August 14th, 2019. The language was precise in the way old men get when they've watched their families long enough to know exactly what needs saying. The document established what it called a secondary protective interest. It stated that in the event the primary estate was contested, manipulated, restructured, or withheld from its intended beneficiaries through any business arrangement, family agreement, or legal instrument not authorised by the original trust, the secondary protective interest would activate. The secondary interest was a direct claim on the Robertson County land and the 3 commercial properties, independent of the contested will, independent of my father's challenge, and held outside of any business trust my father might create. The document named me, Daniel Roy Hargrove. My grandfather had put my middle name in there, Roy, named for my uncle. I hadn't thought about that in years. I read the document twice on Roy's porch while the lake turned silver in the November light. Then I read the last paragraph. It said, I know my son Gerald loves his children. I also know he loves order and control more than he loves their equality. I am not angry at him, but I built what I built with my own 2 hands, and I will not watch it pass to one child while another stands outside the window. Daniel has stood outside the window long enough. This document is the window opening. I folded the document and put it back in the envelope. Roy said quietly, I've already retained an attorney in Nashville. Her name is Lena Park. She has been reviewing everything for 3 weeks. She says the protective interest is airtight. Your grandfather structured it specifically to survive a contested will. I sat with that for a moment. I said, why didn't you tell me before? He said, because I needed to know what they were going to do first. If your father had simply been fair, there was no reason to activate anything. I was hoping he would be fair. I drove home from Murfreesboro with the envelope on the passenger seat. I did not tell Preston. I did not tell my father. I did not call my mother. I called Lena Park on Monday morning, and I told her in precise sentences what had happened at my parents' house in November and what Roy had shown me. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, Mr. Hargrove, I want you to understand something clearly. What your grandfather built for you is not leverage. It's not a threat. It is a legal instrument that has been waiting 4 years to be used. The only question is how you want to use it. I said carefully. She said good. That's exactly right. What followed was 2 months of very quiet work. Lena and Roy's retained estate attorney, a man named David Sutherland out of Nashville, who'd been holding the trust document since 2019, began the process of formally activating the secondary protective interest. The Robertson County land, 340 acres, and the 3 commercial properties in Clarksville, including the retail building on Riverside Drive that had, I learned, been generating $8,400 a month in lease income since 2019 that had been flowing into an account my father managed and had not disclosed to Roy or to me. That detail arrived in a letter from David Sutherland on a Wednesday afternoon in January. I read it at my kitchen table with my second cup of coffee. My father had been collecting lease income from a property that was legally co-held in a trust that had 2 other claimants, Roy and me, and he had not disclosed it or distributed it for 5 years. $8,400 a month, 60 months, that was just over $500,000. I did not call my father. I set the letter down. I went to work, I came home, I made dinner, I watched the news. What I was doing, and what I did not fully understand until later, was the same thing my grandfather had done before me. I was building, quietly, without announcing it, the way you build things that last. The meeting happened in February on a Thursday afternoon. Lena had suggested neutral ground, a conference room at a title company in Nashville, halfway between Clarksville and Cincinnati. She sent the formal notice to my father's attorney, Clifford Brand, and to Preston directly, since Preston had been named in the Hargrove and Sons Trust documents as managing trustee. My father walked into that conference room expecting a negotiation about numbers, a settlement discussion, some family friction that money could smooth over. He walked in and found Roy already seated at the table. Roy, who my father had not spoken to in 14 months, over what my father had described at a 2023 Thanksgiving. One I had not attended, as Roy sticking his nose into things that were already handled. My father looked at Roy, and then looked at me, and then looked at the woman sitting beside me in a grey suit with a legal pad and a pen, whose cap she had already removed. Preston came in 2 minutes later with Clifford Brand. Brand was about 60, tan for February, good shoes. He glanced at Lena Park and I watched something shift behind his eyes, the specific recalibration of a man who has walked into a room and realised it's a different room than he was told it would be. Lena said good afternoon to everyone. She thanks them for coming. She did not offer pleasantries beyond that. She opened by placing 3 documents on the table. She identified each one: the original Hargrove Estate Trust from 2014, the contested will from 2019, and the Seal Trust Amendment from August 2019. She slid a copy of each to Clifford Brand and let him read. Brand read for about 90 seconds. He turned to the 3rd document. He read it for longer. Then he very slowly set his pen down on the table. My father said, "Where did you get that?" Roy said, "Earl gave it to me." My father said, "That document was," and he stopped. Brand put his hand on my father's arm briefly, a lawyer's quiet warning. My father stopped talking. Lena walked through the secondary protective interest in plain language. She covered the Robertson County acreage. She covered the 3 commercial properties. She covered the lease income from Riverside Drive. She placed a summary sheet in front of my father with a single figure at the bottom. The accumulated undistributed lease income over 60 months, plus the applicable interest under Tennessee trust law. My father looked at the number, Preston looked at the number, then Lena said, "Mr. Hargrove, I want to be clear about what my client is and is not asking for today. He is not asking to dissolve Hargrove and Sons. He is not asking for your home. He is not asking to litigate your father's contested will. He is asking for what Earl Hargrove designated for him. Nothing added, nothing taken from anything that was always yours, just what was his." Brand leaned over and spoke quietly to my father for about 30 seconds. My father looked at me. Not at Lena. Not at Roy. At me. He said, "I always intended to make it right." I looked at him for a moment. I thought about the sign in the yard, Hargrove and Sons. I thought about March, the month they had drawn up the documents without calling me. I thought about the stranger named Cole Vickers with his headshot next to Preston's on that sign in front of the house where I had grown up, the house my grandfather's money had helped buy. I said, "I know you did, Dad." I said it quietly, and I meant it, and I also meant the rest of what I didn't say. That intending and doing are not the same thing. That the distance between those 2 things, in this family, across my entire life, had been the distance I had lived in, and that my grandfather, a man who was gone before he could see any of this, had seen it clearly enough from 2019 to build me a door out of it. The settlement was signed 4 weeks later. The Robertson County land remained jointly held between my father and Roy, as it always should have been. The 3 commercial properties were placed into a separate trust, with equal distributions to all named beneficiaries, including Marcus and Diane, Patricia's children, who Lena had located in Charlotte, North Carolina, and who had not known they had an inheritance waiting for 5 years. The accumulated lease income was distributed per trust formula. My share after legal fees and 5 years of compounding was documented in a figure I will not repeat here, except to say it was more than enough to do what I did next. What I did next was not what anyone expected. I did not move back to Clarksville. I did not put my name on a competing sign in my parents' yard. I did not call Preston with a speech. I bought a building. It was a 4-story commercial building on a corner in downtown Clarksville, Tennessee. Red brick, 1940s construction, good bones, empty for 3 years since the last tenant relocated. I bought it in April under an LLC. I renovated it across the summer. I did the structural assessments myself on weekends, because 14 years as a structural engineer had taught me what a building can carry and what it can't. I opened in September. The ground floor is a civil engineering consultancy. My name is on the door. Daniel Hargrove, PE, licensed structural engineer, State of Tennessee. I had transferred my Ohio license the previous spring. 6 weeks after opening, I had 3 municipal contracts and a referral from a developer in Nashville who had found me through Lena Park, who had apparently told several people I was the kind of engineer who understood more than buildings. The second floor is leased to a veteran-owned insurance firm. The third floor to an accounting practice run by a woman named Sasha Morales, who grew up in Clarksville and had been operating out of her spare bedroom for 4 years. The fourth floor I kept. It has a drafting table, a good coffee maker, and windows facing south that fill with light in the afternoon. The sign above the door reads Hargrove Building. It says nothing about sons. It does not say since any particular year. It just says what it is. My father drove past it in October. He called me that evening. He didn't say much. He asked how business was going. I told him it was going well. He said good. He said the word good the way you say it, when you are proud of something you don't know how to take credit for, and don't deserve to anyway. And you know it. I said, I'll come for Thanksgiving, Dad, if the invitation is open. He said, it's always open, son. I drove down in November, 1 year almost to the day from the 1st November. The sign was gone from the front yard. The dogwood trees looked like themselves again. My mother made the turkey and the sweet potato casserole, and my nephew, Preston's youngest, sat next to me at the table and asked me what engineers actually did all day. And I told him we figured out what things could hold. Preston and I did not talk about the settlement directly. We talked about the Titans and the weather and whether the driveway needed resurfacing. At one point he looked at me across the table and said, "The building looks good, Danny. I heard you've got a wait list for tenants." I said, "Working on it." He nodded. There was something in the nod I hadn't seen in a long time from him. It might have been respect. It might have been something older than that. It might have been 2 brothers figuring out how to be in the same room after one of them spent 40 years taking up all the air and the other one finally stopped letting him. I drove home to Cincinnati that night with the heater on and the radio low. I thought about my grandfather. I thought about Earl Hargrove, who had planted those same dogwood trees before my father was born, who had built 340 acres and 3 commercial properties from work I had only ever heard described in past tense, who had sat down in August of 2019, knowing he was dying, and written 4 pages of precise legal language, not out of anger, but out of the stubborn, specific love of a man who understood that some doors have to be built in advance. I thought about the line Roy had read to me on the porch. This document is the window opening. I pulled off the highway once in Bowling Green for gas. The night was clear, cold without committing. The kind of November that had always felt to me like something getting ready to change. I looked at the building's reflection in the gas station window. My jacket, my truck. My face, which looked the way my grandfather's looked in the photographs from when he was about my age. A man mid-build, not finished yet, not trying to be. I got back in the truck. I have a building in Clarksville with my name above the door. I have a grandfather who built me a wall before I knew I needed one. I have a family that is not entirely fixed, and may never be, but is, at least beginning to understand what it costs to break. And somewhere in a desk drawer in an office on the 4th floor of a red brick building on a Clarksville corner, there is a pocket knife with my initials on the blade that my uncle gave me when I was 12. I brought it down from Cincinnati when I moved the office. I put it in the drawer the first day. I don't carry it. I just keep it there. Some things you hold not because you need them, but because they were given to you by someone who saw you clearly before you saw yourself. My grandfather built me a door. My uncle held it open for 5 years. I walked through it. The lighthouse stays lit.